Live when I
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Historical Society of Frankfurt. My name is Fred Prescott. I'm a member here at the Society, and I'll be your host for this evening's program. Tonight's story is entitled Wistar Park, the first official ball field in Frankfurt. Now, I might have called it Wistar Park, Where Are You? Or Wistar Park, Lost and Found. So let me try and explain that. Early in the year, I was thumbing through some information we had on the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets when I read that they got their start as a sandlot team and played on a field here in Frankfurt called Wistar Park. But the location of the park was never mentioned. So I started to see if I could find it. I looked through quite a few programs that we have here. I went on the internet, and although there was a lot of mentions of Wistar Park, the location was never really shown. So I couldn't really find it. And I couldn't find anything so much that it was kind of getting me down. I gave it up for a lost cause. But then it really started to bug me, and I couldn't leave it alone. So, okay, I thought, what do I know about sandlot ball and sports in Frankfurt? Now, I'm not talking Little League, but serious, adult, non-professional, sometimes semi-professional sports. I immediately thought of Whitehall Commons for this reason. I pretty much considered the Commons the mecca for sandlot football, hardball, and softball in Frankfurt, and maybe it was old enough to be Wistar Park. Now, the Commons consisted of 3 fields side by side, yet was intersected by streets. So this is my description. Whitehall Playground. It was the easternmost section bordered by Torresdale Avenue on the west, Wakeling Street on the north, Worth Street and the railroad on the east, and Herbert Street on the south. It was a hard-packed cinder field with no grass, surrounded by a high wrought iron fence. There were large gateways for entrances, one on either side. At the north end of that field was Whitehall Bathy and the recreation office. At the south end, at some point, a year that I don't remember, they built a large concrete grandstand that ran along parallel to Herbert Street. Harding Field is the center section of the Commons. This is the part of the Commons I had the most intimate and sometimes tumultuous relationship with. Bordered by Wakeling Street on the north, Torresdale Avenue on the east, the back fences and property lines of homes along Margaret Street on the south and Goodman Street on the west. This field also was a hard-packed cinder field with no grass except what was around the school and a very small patch in the center. The grass park. This was the third piece in the Commons. If it had a proper name, no one that I knew called it anything else other than the grass park. My grandfather told me that when he was a kid, he would cross over the stream that became Goodman Street and tend cows there. This stream may have been a branch of the Little Tacony Creek, which flowed through the area. Now, the grass park was bordered by, once again, with Wakeling Street on the north, Goodman Street on the east, Margaret Street on the south, and Valley Street, now long gone, on the west. At the corner of Margaret and Valley Streets stood the Valley Dye Works and a vacant lot behind that building on the west side of Valley Street. This is a 1910 map of Whitehall Commons, and if you stare at it, you can see that Goodman Street is misaligned, but it does actually connect. At the very bottom, there's the center section is a wedge-shaped block with a bunch of homes on it. The red arrow you see there was my house, and there is a larger inset to the right that shows my house. And that's where I saw all the ball games from. Born in 1941, for the first almost 40 years of my life, I lived in that family house on Margaret Street between Torresdale Avenue and Goodman Street. My house and other neighbors' houses were located in the center section of Whitehall Commons, referred to as Harding Field because of Harding Junior High School, located at the north end of the field that ran along Wakeling Street. The easternmost field of Whitehall Commons was Whitehall Playground, and the westernmost, of course, was the grass park. All right, and we have a little map from 1923 that shows improvements being made to Whitehall Park. Now, I want to call your attention to the west side, or your left as you're looking at the screen. That street that's right there below the word park, that was Valley Street. And the little walkways you see around that area did come in, but didn't really look like that. And there's a kind of a building there that never happened. The rest is fairly good. Now, if anybody has a question on what that cross hatching is, I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. Okay, so let's proceed. I was in elementary school during the 40s, but my father played both football and softball for the Goodman Athletic Association, founded in 1930, and the Commons was their home field. Now, I saw many a game there and even remember talent scouts from the Philadelphia Eagles stopping by for a look-see every so often. One year, those scouts selected a Goodman player for the tryouts to play for the Eagles. The fellow they wanted asked if they would also take his brother, and when the scouts declined, he said he wasn't going. Okay, now we have a picture of the Goodman jacket, which happened to be my father's, and you can see that by the patch on the right side that they were the Eastern Conference champions in 1950. Now here's the Goodman football team in 1949. All the way to the right is my dad. I recognize a lot of those faces, but the names are long gone. Here's the 50 team when they were the Northeast Conference champions. On the left is my dad. Now, I think he stopped playing football either during the war or prior to the war. He continued to play softball for a lot of years after. He was involved at that time in 1950, probably in the staff of the Athletic Association, and he was also the first aid man. We had this leather box, which was painted white with a big red cross on it. And inside were antiseptics and bandages, and there were sprints and wraps for anybody that got a bad sprain or hurt or whatever, their finger or ankle. He would wrap them and then promptly send them off to the local chiropractor. Okay, Goodman softball field was in the center section of the Commons where you could see 3 softball games being played on any given night. Church leagues and industrial leagues, including women's fast-pitch softball. Even Flatiron's great pitcher, George Ulmer, maybe the best fastball softball pitcher ever, played there a few times. Across the street in Whitehall Playground, the Olney Cadets played the Kansas City Stars in a women's fast-pitch softball championship game. If memory serves me right, Olney played single games for only 2 seasons. As mentioned earlier, for just about 40 years, I could look out my back fence on almost any night of the week except Sunday and watch softball game or games. In addition to the sports activities, for 2 or 3 seasons, the champion drum and bugle corps, Riley's Raiders, practiced there. They were very loud. Now, this is the reason I thought right away that a long time before me, Whitehall Commons may have been Wistar Park. But I could not find any proof that this was the case. So where was this park? Was it Simpson Playground, Baldwin Field, Pioneer Stadium? It was none of these, and I failed in this quest. Then one Saturday, I was given 2 articles of the Historical Society's papers read to transpose from handwritten stories to a typed copy for easier reading. I made some copies and took them home. One of those papers was titled Frankfurt Athletic Association from 1899 until 1909 by Bruce Wilson. I read through the papers and there it was, a complete description of Wistar Park, including descriptions of the baseball and football fields. Now, whether this was divine providence or dumb luck, the missing Wistar Park was found. I sincerely thank Mr. Wilson for his work in making it possible to uncover another piece of Frankfurt history. So here's tonight's presentation. Wistar Park, the first official ball field in Frankfurt. So referring to a field where amateur sports are played, the term sandlot ball is still recognized and used today. This term is thought to have been coined about 1839 to 1846. The word sandlot refers to a makeshift ball field, which might be nothing more than an empty piece of land in any particular area, composed of sand or dirt or grass or even hard-packed cinders, such as the case in 2 of the 3 fields that make up Whitehall Commons, and that were used by ball clubs for many years. These fields must be big enough to host a game of baseball or football. By the mid-1800s, the still developing games of baseball and football were no longer the exclusive right of elite colleges and wealthy gentlemen and their country clubs. A growing public interest saw the popular rise of these sports and a realization that they could be played by the everyday citizen. Because of this desire to play, amateur teams sprang up in cities and towns across the country. At that time, there were no hard rules and standards. Even equipment used in playing this game could be improvised to take the place of bases, balls, or bats if they were unavailable. Prior to the Civil War, baseball competed for public interest with cricket and regional variations of baseball, notably a game called town ball played here in Philadelphia. The Massachusetts game played in New England. In the 1860s, aided by the war, New York-style baseball expanded into a national game. As interest grew in baseball and football increased, the challenge of securing suitable playing fields grew even greater. As the need grew, athletic associations began to form in order to oversee scheduling and the equitable use of a city's parks and lands, and here in Frankfurt, it was no different. In 1854, the borough of Frankfurt, then a suburb northeast of the city of Philadelphia, was incorporated into the city. The new community of Frankfurt was thriving with growing population and a rapid rise in small businesses and light industry. New streets and the extension of existing streets were in the planning stages. Yet in spite of all this activity, there were still large tracts of land dedicated to agriculture. Such was the case of the Wistar estate and farm. Now, I'd like to digress just a minute. It was pointed out early on when I was first working on this story that it was confusing as to whether this park was Wistar, W-I-S-T-A-R, or Wistar, W-I-S-T-E-R. Now, in fact, it's both, depending upon which of the family lines you are reading about. In the well-documented files of Pennsylvania history, They are listed as the Wistar family. It seems that when Caspar Wistar emigrated from Hillsbach, Germany to Philadelphia in the colonies at age 21, September 16, 1717, his name was spelled as Wistar by clerks of the period. Now, Caspar accepted the spelling of his name, and his direct descendants retained it to distinguish him from the posterity of his brother John. This was considered the senior line. After the death of their father in Germany in January of 1727, Caspar's younger brother Johann Wistar immigrated and joined Caspar in Philadelphia, where he was known as John Wistar, Wister. This was designated the junior line, and John and his direct descendants all accepted it. The story of the Wistar family's accomplishments in early America is unprecedented, with plenty of documentation of the family. In all references, the estate in Frankfurt was purchased by Richard Wistar of the junior line, yet was referred to as the Wistar estate using Wistar, indicating the senior line. All right, let's get back to the ballpark. A large tract of land, once locally known as the Smith Farm, owned by Jacob Smith, was sold in a sheriff's sale to William Pert, who in turn sold the property to William Turnbull. In March of 1807, Turnbull conveyed the 70-plus acres of the Smith Farm to Richard Wistar the Elder. This tract of land straddled the then Oxford Pike, now Oxford Avenue, and its boundaries were approximately as follows. It may sound a little confusing. From the point where the then unopened Leaper Street intersects Oxford Pike, travel in a westerly direction along the line of the proposed Harrison Street and property line of William Overington in the line of the proposed Oakland Street. In a northeasterly direction, follow along the Oakland Street right away to a point on Oxford Pike. Go northerly on Oxford Pike to Elbow Lane, which is now gone. Continue along Elbow Lane to Castor's Road, which is now Castor Avenue, then easterly along Castor's Road to a point that intersected Dark Run Lane, now Cheltenham Avenue. This intersection would be recognized as Oxford Circle. Then run southerly down Dark Run Lane to the line of the back lines of the properties on Penn Street and the right-of-way line of the future extension of Leaper Street. Follow this property line back down to the starting point at the intersection of Leaper Street and Oxford Pike. This is the approximate track of the old Smith Farm. Here is the Smith Farm, but it's at the time, I believe, when the Wistar family had already moved in. That road you see to the right is Oxford Pike. So it's a pretty vast estate, 75 acres or better, straddling both sides of the turnpike. So there was a lot of land out there. Now, about the time of the Civil War, upon part of the land on the west side of Oxford Pike, where Frankfurt High School now sits, between what became the extension of Harrison Street and Wakeling Street, the wealthy Wistar family set about establishing and building an elegant country estate, and animal barns, the likes of which no one would associate with what is normally perceived as an animal barn. Now, take a minute. Think of every barn you ever saw and what your concept of an animal barn might be. And then I want you to look at the Wistar barns. This is the front view of the Wistar barns. You can see it's the craziest looking barn you ever saw, with towers and spires and all kinds of stuff. This is the back end of the barn. This is one end of the barn. This is the barn and stable. Spring house. Believe it or not, that's the chicken house. And that is the ice house. So, with a great stone structure of green serpentine granite and brownstone, with many connecting buildings, the barns with several castle-like towers, stained glass windows, and many doors with expensive brass hinges and locks were a sight to behold. Even the interiors had finished walls and highly polished hardwood floors. It was said the barns could even be a comfortable home for a man of means. Now, named the Oaklands by the Wistar family, other features included a stretch of woods running along Castor Road northerly to the future Harrison Street, a deer run for which cedar posts ran along the lines of Cherry Lane to make an enclosure. A spring and a pond were also part of the grounds from which a waterway was supposed to be constructed down to Oxford Pike. Excuse me. After the death of Richard Wistar the Elder in 1821, his lands were then passed down through the family until it was finally held by Richard Wistar III, who died in 1894. Now, he willed the estate to William Gorman and G. Washington Powell, his executors and real estate agents. Some of the heirs tried to break this will by asserting that the executors had used undue influence on the old man. But that attempt failed. All the litigating members of the family and his executors joined together in a deed to the Gerard Trust Company to sell the property. Powell and Gorman were appointed the area occupied by the Frankfurt Country Club as their share of the land. In May of 1899, now realizing and understanding the need for scheduling, structure, and most importantly, a permanent and regulated field on which the young Frankfurt baseball and football teams could play, a group of enterprising gentlemen of the area joined together and formed the Frankfurt Athletic Association. Before anything could be accomplished, a playing field had to be established. The Wistar estate, comprising of about 75 acres, now came into play. The officers of the FAA quickly entered into negotiations with the heirs of the Wistar estate and established the following. From the intersection of Leaper Street and Oxford Pike, that tract of ground between what is now the southerly side of Leaper Street and traveling in a northerly direction on the easterly side of Oxford Pike to the southerly side of Saul Street, and extending easterly along Saul Street from the east side of Oxford Pike to a point about 30 feet from the southerly side of Wakeling Street, and paralleling southerly down to Leaper Street, then westerly along Leaper Street to the beginning intersection and approximately the ground occupied by the Frankfurt Athletic Association. This site was selected and named Wistar Park by representatives of the Athletic Association who opened for business. Its ticket office and gates located at Leaper Street and Oxford Pike in the spring of 1899. The lease for these premises stipulated that the representatives of the Wistar estate be paid $15 monthly in advance. In addition to baseball, football, the association would also support and provide for soccer, rugby, athletic events, and lawn fees. Okay, so I read that description and decided to try and sketch it out. And this is what I came up with. And what was driving me crazy is the description of the main gate. Now, if you look at that little point where it says how, that's what I kept thinking. How did they have a main gate and a ticket office in that intersection? It just boggled my mind. I couldn't figure it out. So I kind of skipped by that for a while. With a sports field now secured, on the 21st of May, 1899, the Frankfurt Athletic Association placed a notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which read as follows. The Frankfurt Athletic Club have organized for the season of 1899 and have enclosed grounds at Wistar Park, which place has been leased for 5 years. Any good amateur or semi-professional team can secure a game with good guarantee by addressing George C. Gilmore, 4633 Penn Street in Frankfurt. Now, Gilmore was the first baseball manager. We should make note to mention that in the spring of 1899, the newly planned streets and the extension of existing streets through Frankfurt had not yet been accomplished. Oxford Pike at that time was a rutty, winding turnpike extending from Frankfurt Avenue North to Dark Run Lane, now Cheltenham Avenue. Leaper Street stopped abruptly where it intersected Oxford Pike, but was to be extended to Dark Run Lane. Harrison Street, Wakeling Street, and Dyer Street were planned to continue to Castor Road, but did not extend past Penn Street. Penn Street was not open west of Dyer Street, and Oakland Street was not yet through. Now, this is an old picture of one of the football teams, and you can see in the background this high board fence, and that's kind of important. In describing the general layout inside the high board fence which surrounded these grounds on 3 sides, it may be well to begin by using the baseball catcher's backstop as a guidepost. By using the center of this backstop as a starting point of a diagonal access running through home base to the pitcher's box, to the second base, to center field, and on to the intersection of Wakeling Street and Saul Street. Now, one may visualize the general plan of the playing field, especially the baseball field. The left field foul line of the baseball field extended from home base toward the intersection of Oxford Pike and Saul Street. The right field foul line extended from home base toward the intersection of Wakeling Street and Leaper Street. Mention might be made here that the right field foul line did not extend to the fence on the northerly side of Wakeling Street, but fell short of that goal by about 60 feet, where it intersected the fence on the easterly side of Leaper Street. The structure commonly known as the bleachers was set back from the right field foul line and paralleled it the distance from home base to first base. This structure was erected in the spring of 1899. The Baseball Grandstand, a frame structure with roof and was used as a clubhouse, was not complete until early September 1889. It was set back from the left field foul line and paralleled it the distance from home base to third base. Now, the football field at Wistar Park was planned with its long side extending in a general east and west direction, similar to the general direction of Saul Street, while its short sides, on which were erected the goalposts, extended in a general north and south direction, similar to the general direction of Wakeling Street. Appearing in the list of baseball teams with whom the Frankfurt team contested during the season were Morrisville, Pennsylvania Railroad YMCA, Chester, Cuban Giants, Tacony, Prospect Park, Olney, East Falls, and Riverton. Now, the baseball season for the year 1899 closed with a record of 17 victories, 4 losses, and 1 tie. This was a highly satisfactory record, especially for the initial season in baseball. But in pausing briefly, the Tacony team must be given more than passing mention here, because in a few of the early years at Wistar Park, a keen rivalry continued to exist between the two clubs. And as long as the nucleus of old players survived and played their old positions, Tacony could be depended upon to present an attractive quality of baseball. In baseball, the improvement noticeable in the teams playing during the latter half of 1899 season, which continued through the 1900 season, which ended with another satisfactory record. Football made its first appearance at Wistar Park in the fall of 1899. Interest in this game here in the previous years had been centered in local football teams comprised of well-known players, whose prospective followers sustained a rivalry, keen and extended, and which in the aggregate assumed sizable proportions. In those early days, 3 football teams can be recalled. The one team, called the Pennant, held forth at John Cooper's cigar store at Main Street and Orthodox Street. The other team, the Central, was associated with the activities of Central Methodist Episcopal Church at Orthodox Street and Griscom Street. The Frankfurt Reserves, a football team composed of aspiring athletes of the town, were granted by the Board of Government of the Frankfurt Athletic Association the privilege to play football at Wistar Park prior to the regular Saturday afternoon game. The reputations of the Pennants and the Centrals for proficiency in football circles was quite extensive, and on the occasion of the annual football contest between the two teams, Frankfurt took on the role of a real college football town, featuring a time-honored football classic. Thus, the sentiment in football smoldered as the Frankfurt Athletic Association attempted to organize a football team having the undivided support of all interests concerned. However, the factional likes and dislikes of the former years sank without a trace when the football activity started and continued to increase as the season progressed. The association's football team played several games in 1899, including victorious contests against the Pioneer Athletic Association, Jefferson Medical College, the Philadelphia Athletic Club, a team from Atlantic City, and others. The football season at Wistar Park closed on Thanksgiving Day, 1899, with the Frankfurt Reserves playing the Westmoreland team in the morning and the Frankfurt varsity contesting in the afternoon with the Philadelphia and Reading football team. Over 2,000 fans watched their hometown win 28-0. It was about 1900 when officers of the Frankfurt Country Club leased part of the estate, starting at the intersection of Leeper Street and running in a northerly direction along the future Harrison Street to Castor Road. Then in a northeasterly direction along Castor Road, where it intersects with Oxford Pike. Then in a southerly direction on the west side of Oxford Pike to the starting point at Leeper Street. The club spent over $50,000 turning the grounds into a golf course with cricket fields and tennis courts. They also turned the old mansion into the clubhouse and converted several of the barns into the men's and women's locker rooms. On September 20th, the Frankfurt AA at its meeting decided to erect a football grandstand and also priced the admission to football games to, guess what, 25 cents. In accordance therewith, the football grandstand was erected and stood on the bed of the unknown Leeper Street, on or near the party boundary, between Wistar Park and the rear of the properties fronting on Penn Street, where is now located the nurses' home of the Frankfurt Hospital and the property adjoining it on the north. The new football grandstand was about 100 feet in length and 18 feet in width, with several private boxes. It stood about midway on the easterly side of the football field and faced the west. The football schedule for 1900 consisted of Royersford, Conshohocken, University of Pennsylvania Scrub, Pennsylvania Railroad YMCA, East Falls, Bridesburg, Covenant Guild, and arch rival Atlantic City. Though not yet using the name Yellow Jackets, an article published on October 6, 1900 in the Frankfurt Herald refers to our home team as the Yellow and Black. We make note that these were the colors of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. From the Herald on December 15th, 1900, we read that a new league of association football players was formed, consisting of Frankfurt, Albion, Brill, North End, Blackburn, Rovers, and Nicetown. In about 1906, the old Wistar estate, now consisting of some 85 plus acres, was sold by the Gerard Trust Company at a public auction held at the Bourse Building in town to Lewis and Alfred E. Burke for $225,442.25. The Burkes, 25 cents. That's a killer, right? The Burkes bought the land as an investment. Wistar Park could and would remain in use. In 1908, the Frankfurt Country Club secured a new lease of the grounds previously mentioned. Now, 1909 proved to be a tumultuous year for Frankfurt sports fans in Wistar Park. On July 19th of 1909, Lewis and Alfred Burke sold 4.6 acres of land to the city of Philadelphia for the construction of the new Frankfurt High School. The tract would be surrounded by Oxford Pike and the newly extended Oakland, Harrison, and Wakeland streets. With the extension of the new streets and the coming construction of the high school, the Frankfurt Country Club shut down its operation on the old estate and moved further north to the old Williams Farm, about a mile north up Oxford Pike. The original Frankfurt Athletic Association apparently disbanded just prior to the 1909 football season. Several of the original players from the 1899 football team kept the team together, and they became known as Loyola Athletic Club. This new club would keep the same playing field at Wistar Park and maintain the old Frankfurt team's colors of yellow and black. With the coming construction of the new high school, the football team now abandoned their field at Wistar Park and moved just a short distance away to Brown's Field at Pratt and Oakland Street, so named because it was part of the old Brown's Farm. In keeping with Yellow Jackets tradition, Loyola carried the Frankfurt name again in 1912 to become the Frankfurt Athletic Association once again. The Yellow Jackets, now playing at Brown's Field, started to build a reputation as a team to beat. Soon they would get a full-fledged football stadium of their own at Frankfurt Avenue and Devereux Street. They would go on to join the NFL and become league champions. Also happening in 1912, where once open fields surrounding the homestead of the Wistar brothers, streets have been extended and opened, and scores of new buildings were now being erected. The old Wistar mansion had become the first home of the new Frankfurt High School, and now the old Wistar barns, ornate and beautiful in design, were being dismantled by Mr. C. West and Company, who operated out of Northwood. Wistar Park, in the meantime, continued to host sports and activities until the First World War. And that's the end of the story. Now, I had a few final notes. Leaper Street did not really cross Oxford Avenue, but was terminated at Harrison Street. It then picked up again at Dyer Street and continued to Pratt Street. So if you take a look at this photograph on that signpost there, it says Leaper Street. And what the street that you're looking at is Harrison Street. That corner of that building is part of an apartment building that now sits where Wistar Park used to be. And the line right at the end of that building are the back lines of the properties on Penn Street. So we can shift over a little bit, and you'll see that this is also at the back end of that apartment complex, and you can see the two walls in that area are in different directions. And this was kind of an eureka moment, because when I look back at the drawing I made with the dimension plan, I finally figured out that one of these two courses, not this one, the other one, the main one, that one of these two courses was where the main entrance and the ticket gate was. So I'm not exactly sure, but that's my best guess. Okay. The intersection this new intersection formed a small triangular piece of property now belonging to the city of Philadelphia. Still standing there today is a stone marker placed there in 1922 by the Historical Society of Frankfurt. The marker denotes a corner of the northwest boundary of the old borough of Frankfurt from 1800 to 1831. Frankfurt High School was built in 1910 as an annex to Central High School, and it was rebuilt as a much larger facility dedicated in 1914. It is the large 4-story castle-like building you see today. It sits on the approximate location of the Wistar Barns between Oxford and Oakland, Harrison, and Wakeman Streets. The location of Brown's Field is listed by Howard Barnes as being on Pratt and Lord Streets, while an article in the Public Ledger dated 11/13/1920 states Brown's Field was located near the high school, and an article in the Ledger dated January 16th, 1922 lists Brown's Field as on Oxford Avenue near the boulevard. So that's still kind of a mystery where Brown's Field actually was. I'm having trouble finding that myself.
Another lecture.
So that's it, everybody. That's the story of that's my story of Wistar Park. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer them if I can.
No questions, but Kevin McCutcheon says, that's so cool, great info.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it.
But well done.
Okay, I have one last thing before we close for this evening is if you got nothing to do, if you're sitting around and you're looking for a project or a hobby, give us some thought about becoming a member over here at the Historical Society, and maybe you can help us out in researching some of the programs that we need to look up and record. We're here. Look us up on the internet. You can find applications there. And
Contact info, yeah.
And give us a try.
The Historical Society of Frankfurt.org.
It's the Historical Society of Frankfurt.org. Good night, everybody.